It's the Temple and the Temporal today. Hello, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, author of the book Consider My Servant Job, on sale now. And this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and it's bring your own refreshments. Ricola for sore throats. I had a annoying summer cold last week, but I'm feeling better now. So I'm going to do something a little bit different today. The reading assignment today is way too long for the my get to the point format. So what I'm going to be doing is changing the format a bit. But before I get into it, just a reminder, we're coming up on Job. I am the author of this book, and if you want to prepare with confidence and teach with power, get a copy of my book. I go through it chapter by chapter, where I explain what's going on, and I understand the book of Job can be confusing, and I help unknot the confusion and help you understand that the book of Job is a way to bring people to Christ. So you understand I have to sell my book. So here we are. Here is the new format, and the point number one is the background, and this is really helpful with this book to make sure that you read the Bible dictionary. The interesting thing is that we're jumping ahead 70 years in the timeline from our last lesson. The Bible dictionary has good information on the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, and it's interesting. Let me take care of this to note that Jews considered the book of Ezra and Nehemiah as one book, not as separate books. And as you read them, you understand there's some overlap, and the sequence gets maybe a little bit squishy at times. But that's just because we separate them into two different books. Also, the person of Ezra is interesting. He has a lot of books in the apocrypha, and Jews see him as really the father of modern rabbinism. How Jews practice Judaism today, they trace it back to how Ezra set up things. You're reading about this in the and as you read between the lines, you can kind of see how the synagogue approach to worship that Jews use nowadays comes back to Ezra. Sorry, getting off the point already, but yeah, it's a fun book for understanding your Jewish neighbors. Okay, point two is the players. First one is Zerubbabel. Say that, Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel. He's the governor of Judea in the area, and he oversees the first wave of the construction. The second player is Ezra, who is a scribe and a priest, and he oversees the culmination of the second wave of the construction, also the immigration. The third person is Nehemiah, and he's the person who oversaw the rebuilding of the walls. Now, you ask me, I'd start with the walls first, the temple second. The Aaronic priesthood was restored before the Melchizedek priesthood, but like I said, this is kind of a little bit fuzzy with the history because there's overlap between the two books. Next person D is Cyrus. He's the king of Persia, and he's the one who organizes this, who allows the Jews to go back and to build the temple. And it's interesting because Isaiah prophesied about King Cyrus, and they were able to point back to their prophecies. Hey, look, our prophets prophesied about you. Hey, let's go back to the temple, and it's a great way to flatter the king. Then you have the locals, are the Samaritans, and now these are peoples that you had. Most of the Jews were taken and scattered. Some taken to Babylon, some went up to the north countries, and from patriarchal blessings, we're assuming this is the Russia area. But you had some people that stayed behind. They intermarried and they changed their worship, and these are the ancestors of the Samaritans that we read about in the New Testament. And they started out supporting the temple, then later they opposed it. Then you have Sanballat, who was another leader, and he was another opposition leader to mostly to Nehemiah. The scoop. Here's the scoop. So 70 years after Babylon was invaded, and yet it's almost a full generation has turned over, and they want to come back, and Cyrus grants the decree to go back, and so what they start working on is the temple. First, they start building the altar, and then they start rebuilding the temple, and also with Nehemiah oversees the rebuilding of the walls of the city for protection. I served my mission in the country, and one of the cities I served in had, well, a lot of the cities had walls around them. You understand that was just a practical necessity. So in both cases with Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, they get opposition. Is that first, the Samaritans say, hey, yeah, we're behind this, but then they started lying about saying, hey, these guys are subversive and they're disloyal to the king. Stuff that kind of happened in our days with the Reed Smoot hearings, if you're familiar with that. So Sorry, like I said, this is a new format. Give you a moment there. And so what they do is there's a bit of a pause with the construction of the temple. Then they go back and start rebuilding it, and able to point back to the prophecy in the previous degree, saying, "Hey, yeah, Cyrus said that we could do this." Then with the walls, is that the people went ahead and rebuilt the walls, and that's where we get the expression where you have the trowel in one hand and the sword in the other hand. That's from Nehemiah 4, verse 14. So they get rebuilt, the walls, the altar, and the temple get rebuilt, but you have another problem with the rich exploiting the poor, and Nehemiah and Ezra have to correct that. So once everything is rebuilt, Ezra teaches the law, and it's an interesting process. You read about that in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 8. And what happened is there is a shift in the language. They're no longer speaking Hebrew. They're speaking a language called Aramaic. However, their scriptures are written in Hebrew, so it's a different language. It's a bit like with Catholics, how their writings are all in Latin, but people locally will speak a different language. So how do you do the Mass in Latin or in the local language? And the church will always translate stuff to the local language. But what Ezra has to do is they'll read it in Hebrew and then do a paraphrase called a Targum, where they explain the sense of the meaning, and also with the time is shifted. We have a similar thing with the Doctrine and Covenants. We're familiar with, it's written in English, which is our language. Places like Mississippi, Missouri, New York, Chicago, we all know where those are, but some of the practices may seem a little bit different, and so sometimes you have to explain it. Sometimes we'd have to get biographical information about the people talked about in these sections. But, sorry, I set this down. That was a scoop. Now the next point, the doctrine. So the point is that he who scattered Israel will gather it, and that's something President Nelson has been talking about. Another doctrinal point is to expect opposition. Another thing to talk about is the church-state relations, how we need to cultivate good church-state relations so that we can do the work of the church. Think about the dedicatory prayer of the Kirtland Temple is a good instance where it mentions the Constitution. Also, a time of personal renewal. Sometimes you need to rebuild your life. The last thing to think about is that this is a package deal, that you just don't focus on one thing, that you need to have the walls, the temporal aspect, but the altar and the temple, the spiritual aspect, the physical structures, but you need to have the law where people are obeying it. You need to have all those things synchronized and in order, because sometimes people get this idea that all you have to do is to show up to sacrament meeting, take the sacrament like you're just grabbing a Happy Meal, then you skedaddle home, and that you're being a good member of the church. And if that's where you're at with the church, I can accept that, but that's not the place where you need to be. And make sure you're taking a cafeteria Christian approach to church, which President Nelson also warned about. Okay, point. It doesn't matter. We're at the end of it. We're at the Christ quotient. And this is from Joseph Smith. What he actually looked like, we're still debating it. The science is in. It's an interesting picture, but this is what Joseph Smith said, and this is from the Joseph Smith Manual, chapter 36. I put notes below, page 416. What was the object of the gathering the people of God in any age of the world? The main object was to build unto the Lord a house whereby he could reveal unto his people the ordinances of his house and the glories of his kingdom, and teach the people the way of salvation. For there are certain ordinances and principles that, when they are taught and practiced, must be done in a place or house of worship built for that purpose. And the next page, why gather the people together in this place? For the same purpose that Jesus wanted to gather the Jews, to receive the ordinances, the blessings, the glories that God is in store for his saints. I'll now ask this assembly and all the saints if you'll now build the house and receive the ordinances and blessings which God has in store for you, or will you not now build into the Lord this house and let him pass by and bestow these blessings upon another people? And that's the point of it, of rebuilding the temple, is to bring people to Christ. And that's the point of Christ's missionary ministry, and why we do missionary work, is to bring people to Christ. That's the point.